Welcome to this edition of Head to Head. I'm your host, Cam McKinney, and this is episode number 331 of the podcast. And on this episode, I'm talking about NBA Insider Adrian Wojnarowski's surprise retirement. So we are very close to the start of a new NBA season, and it's shocking that right before that, the league's premier newsbreaker, Adrian Wojnarowski, retires. If there was a trade or a coaching hire or fire, he was the one most likely going to break the news. Woj is leaving ESPN to be the GM for the basketball program at St. Bonaventure University, whatever that means. Woj is an interesting figure in basketball history. I, like many, would scroll Twitter at the NBA trade deadline just waiting for him to break news, hoping it would involve my team. He really benefited from the fact that the insider in sports position has really risen over the last decade or so, mainly because of social media. He breaks news immediately and unexpectedly. He's not the first insider in basketball history. You had Pete Vesey with NBC and TNT and David Aldridge at ESPN and TNT. But news breaking just became bigger and bigger because of Twitter. Let's get into it. The thing I very much disliked about Woj's time at ESPN was his rivalry with fellow insider Shams Charania and the interest around who is going to break the story first. I have zero interest in that nature of it. These trades and signings are going to come out eventually, and I just sometimes feel like a victim of instant gratification, which Woj bombs had become these many years. And yes, he is very good at breaking these stories, and for entertainment purposes, it's needed, and he's very good at his job. But the media helped create a rivalry between these two that is not super interesting. And who exactly is rooting for either one of them to break the news? We just want the news to be broken. That's what I found most insane about this forced rivalry, is nobody was on Team Shams and nobody was on Team Woj. The creation of famous sports insiders goes back to the NFL with Adam Schefter, and I know that they had the late Chris Mortensen first, but it felt like with Schefter, the beginning of this guy is going to break every big NFL story on Twitter, surpassing other well-known insiders, Jay Glazer, Jason La Canfora at the time. That's really what Woj became for ESPN. He became basketball's version of Adam Schefter. And I personally have the exact same feelings for Schefter as I do for Woj. They are obviously great at breaking news, but when they attempt to give opinions or analysis on the sports they cover, I become disinterested. It used to be that an insider would only show up when news broke or during a trade deadline special. But what it's become is Schefter is on your television every day, and it was the same with Woj. They would put him on a panel during a halftime show, and as a television personality, I don't find either interesting. And some of that probably has to do with the fact that they can't always give strong opinions because they don't want to upset their sources who are giving them their breaking news in the first place. That's what's really interesting about Woj, is he was great at the news breaking aspect of his industry, but was he really good on the television side of things? Were like people excited to see him on TV? No, they only wanted him to say breaking news and then for him to go away. The problem is he wasn't going away. They wanted him to give actual basketball insight, which he really wasn't doing on a regular basis, that I found to be very interesting. Maybe others have a different take on this, but I don't think Woj was interesting when it came to his basketball analysis. I think he was in over his head a bit when it came to that stuff. I don't want to be cruel, but I just felt like he lacked a certain personality, and we didn't really see Woj a lot on television before he joined ESPN. He was a Yahoo insider who would appear on television, give the news, and then go away. He probably should not have graduated from that job, and the only reason he did is because a sports insider became more and more prevalent across all sports. I do think Woj was very self-aware at what he was good at. He knew that he had to break news instantly in order for him to remain relevant. It's why it got so annoying during the NBA draft when he was just tweeting who was going to be drafted before they were drafted. And I know the NBA got upset at him, but that's why he was doing that. He was putting on a show. He was saying, saying here, this is the thing I'm very good at. These teams are telling me who they're going to draft, and I'm going to tell you that. I'm going to make myself big by giving you breaking news. I would argue that sports insiders are the only real news breakers who have benefited from social media. Like Woj would not have become super famous without Twitter. Adam Schefter would not be as big as he is right now without social media. Let's just say it was a weird week for the NBA. So Woj announces his retirement, and then a few days later, it was announced that ESPN let go of basketball writer Zach Lowe, who has a really good podcast, The Low Post. He was on television a lot. He was on NBA Today. I thought he was one of their best basketball analysts, and I know I'm not alone in that thought. Many people are talking about the fact that ESPN just let go their best basketball mind. So what I take from this news is that ESPN really values two things when it comes to sports right now. People that can break the news like Woj, like Adam Schefter, like Jeff Passan, and guys who have hot takes, the Stephen A. Smiths of the world, the Pat McAfees of the world. To a lesser extent, Mike Greenberg, he's a host, but he also comes in with some hot takes from time to time. Paul Feinbaum, the morning that I'm recording this podcast, I just heard Paul Feinbaum say, is Alabama better without Nick Saban? That's the kind of sports analysis they're really going for. They're trying to get you to have a strong opinion on what the commentator is saying. And that's what Paul Feinbaum does. That's what Stephen A. Smith does. That's what Greenberg does. That's what McAfee definitely does. And that was not Zach Lowe. Zach Lowe had really thoughtful takes on basketball. He had strong opinions, but they were knowledgeable. They were fact-based. He was reasonable, but he was really good at what he was doing. And I really thought that ESPN was beginning to value this kind of basketball insightfulness because they did put JJ Redick on the broadcast of the NBA Finals. And I think he had a lot of similarities with Zach Lowe. Like, he just wanted to talk about basketball. He didn't want to have hot takes. He didn't want to have debates. He just wanted to give you insights on the game itself. I guess I was wrong because they clearly value the Richard Jeffersons and the Kendrick Perkinses way more than they value Zach Lowe. Another guy I always thought ESPN has taken for granted is ESPN NBA analyst Tim Legler. I have always thought he is one of their best analysts, even when he was just appearing on NBA Countdown occasionally and on First Take. I know he has a more prominent role with SVP at night on SportsCenter, and he's very good at that job, but Tim Legler should be like broadcasting the NBA Finals for ESPN on their halftime show or be a part of the broadcast. He's that good about talking about basketball. But for whatever reason, he's been a guy that ESPN has never added to their main coverage. He's never been a prominent figure. Him and Zach Lowe were two of the best basketball minds at ESPN, and now one of them is gone. That's insane. And I'm worried about the future for Tim Legler. I don't know if we're ever going to live in a world where he's added to their NBA Finals coverage. Basketball media in general is just in a weird place. I mean, we're soon going to be living in a world where TNT is no longer going to have the rights, so Ernie Johnson might not be the host of Inside the NBA for that much longer. Charles Barkley might not be covering the sport. Shaquille O'Neal might not be covering the sport, even though I find him kind of annoying. He is better than a lot of other people. Kenny the Jet Smith, my favorite basketball analyst, might soon not be covering the sport. I mean, what is the NBA going to do without good coverage? Are they only going to have guys like Stephen A. Smith? And here is my big problem with these guys like Stephen A. Smith and the Pat McAfees of the world, is they want to talk about everything. They don't want to focus their analysis on one sport. That's why Zach Lowe was so good at his job, because he zoned in on basketball and only covered basketball. And for as much as I love Mike Greenberg, I've been watching him for almost 20 years now. He wants to do everything. He wants to do Sunday NFL Downtown. He wants to talk about the NBA. He wants to talk about it all. And I feel like the guys who are best about talking about these sports are the guys who only cover one sport. And those are the guys that ESPN seemingly doesn't value anymore. And these other stations really should, like the NBCs and the Amazons. Those are the guys they should be getting for their NBA coverage. Everyone online is talking about how is ESPN going to fill the hole left by Woj. Are they going to make Jeff Passan, who covers baseball, switch over to basketball? I think that would be insane. I hope that doesn't happen. Jeff Passan is really good and really cares about the sport of baseball. I don't want him to switch to the NBA. Are they going to bring in Shams? That's probably more likely. But I think the bigger hole is who's going to replace Zach Lowe. That's the bigger replacement. Who's going to give you real insight into the sport of basketball? I do believe there's one guy at ESPN who can do both what Woj can do and what Lowe can do, and that's Brian Windhorst. Brian Windhorst is able to break news, but he's also able to analyze it as well. He is really good on the NBA Today. He's really good on his own podcast. I really like listening to Brian Windhorst talk about basketball. I know people make fun of him because of his connections with LeBron James, and he was the guy who followed LeBron to Miami and then back to Cleveland. I get it. He covers LeBron a lot, but I think he has become a really good NBA insider, and he's also really interesting on TV. There's always a meme of him. I think he's really good. I think he's super entertaining. I just think if you look at the history of basketball broadcasting, some of the best voices in the sports have been the guys who were not super well known. I mentioned the name Kenny the Jet Smith, Tim Legler. These were guys who were good NBA players, not great NBA players, but they became some of the best broadcasters in modern basketball. Hubie Brown, he was a decent head coach. He was well known, but he became one of the best voices in basketball. And I think ESPN is really lacking that when it comes to their analyst. And to bring it all around and bring it back to Woj, I think he was kind of part of the problem because they became fixated on news breaking. And who do I want to have the loudest opinion about the news that Woj just broke? So that's who we're going to give airtime. Here's this guy going to break the news. We just need some guy to yell about the news that was just broken. If you can't tell from listening to this podcast, I'm really worried about the future coverage of the sport of basketball. Soon there might not be an NBA TV because Turner's going to lose their coverage, so that channel will be shut down. I don't know what's going to happen with that, how the league is going to cover themselves anymore. ESPN is lacking a face for their coverage. I know Doris Burke is really good at her job, but they're lacking a face. Like Mike Breen just isn't enough anymore. They just lost JJ Redick, a rising star. Say what you will about him. I thought he was really good during the NBA Finals. And now you have to question the network's decision making because them losing Woj should have meant that Zach Lowe is going to play an even bigger role in their basketball coverage for this upcoming season. Yet instead it means we're letting you go because we no longer have that guy. Like the decision making at ESPN when it comes to their basketball coverage is maddening to say the least. And it's not just this year. Over the last few years, they've lost some really good inside voices. Amin Al-Hassan, who's now again working with Dan Le Batard at his network, I thought he was really good when it came to the NBA coverage. Tom Habestraw, I think he's a really good NBA voice. They lost him for no reason. What happened clearly is that they picked the guys who broke the news over the guys who had good analysis about the sport itself. And what's more entertaining is the guys who have the good analysis. Because the guys who break the news, you talk about the news for 5 minutes and then you move on from your day. You don't want to watch Woj on TV for an hour. You don't want to watch Adam Schefter on your television for an hour. You just want them to break the news and then to be gone, not to be rude about it. No matter what happens, ESPN is going to get another Woj. I think they're searching for it. My worry is, and I know I'm right, is they're not going to get another Zach Lowe because they're not looking for that because they didn't value what they had in the first place. That's my main concern. concern. And if you read Twitter, that's the concerns of many. And my hope is that the people who are gaining the NBA rights, the Amazons of the world, the NBCs of the world, is that they give Zach Lowe a job immediately. Yes, we're all hoping he goes back to the Ringer and joins Bill Simmons, but my real hope is that he becomes a prominent member of NBC's coverage of basketball moving forward. That would be the way to go. When it comes to Woj, I do respect a man who leaves his field at the top of his game, and he was at the top of his game. He was as relevant as ever. NBA fans are still super fixated on his Twitter account and the Woj bombs and the search for the Woj bomb. Oh, when is a Woj bomb going to drop? I mean, that became somewhat iconic. That being said, it's all about the movement in the sport. I mean, moves are still going to be made. I mean, LeBron James, in a certain way, really created the Wojs of the world because he formed the Big Three, and then superstars are constantly on the move for that supermax contract. There's always going to be a star player who wants to leave a bad situation, and that's going to make room for these insiders to emerge. And one thing that I think not enough people have talked about when it came to this Woj retirement news is that Woj became bigger than Adam Schefter because there's more moves in the NBA than there is in the NFL. I mean, the trade deadline when it comes to the NFL is pathetic. Adam Schefter really only gets the NFL offseason to be king. Once the season starts, yes, he's on your TV every Sunday giving you the injury news, but that really doesn't mean anything to anyone, really. Woj was able to shine during the season because the trade deadline mattered, and then the offseason because the flurry of moves that happened during the NBA offseason is wild. I mean, in the NFL, the star quarterbacks barely leave their teams. Dak Prescott remained with the Dallas Cowboys because we all knew that Dak Prescott was going to stay with the Dallas Cowboys. Adam Schefter wasn't going to be able to break that kind of news that Dak Prescott was leaving. But when it comes to the NBA, you never know. Kevin Durant could wake up tomorrow and decide he doesn't want to be a member of the Phoenix Suns. The NBA had become the wild, wild west, and Adrian Wojnarowski was able to flourish because of it. Woj really benefited from the sport that he was covering, even more so than Jeff Passan. Jeff Passan is really good at his job, but Major League Baseball is not exciting during the trading deadline. There are never really big moves anymore, but with the NBA, a big move can come out of nowhere. It's why the league is super popular. Yes, in some ways I'm going to miss for this season hearing that Woj is going to break a news, because that's really cool when he does that, when a surprise move comes out of nowhere. But what I'm going to miss more is insights from guys like Zach Lowe, because I think that's what the league needs now more than ever. It doesn't need another insider. There will always be an insider because there will always be moves happening. And yeah, it's been really interesting to hear Woj's colleagues congratulate him on his retirement. What I'm more interested in is how do the NBA players actually feel about Woj? Why is this the guy breaking all of these stories? Are they in love with him? Like, does LeBron James have a relationship with Woj? Does Kevin Durant have a relationship with Woj? Those are the type of things I want to learn, and maybe now that he's retired, we're going to learn more about why this was the guy that was breaking all of the NBA's biggest news stories over the last 7 years at ESPN. Like, why did this guy of all the guys become the guy? Again, not to diminish his accomplishments, because he did accomplish a lot. He became super relevant by breaking big stories time and time again. But I do believe that this was a right place at the right time kind of circumstance, that he really did benefit from the internet, and he did benefit from the emergence of player movement in the NBA. In the 90s, players of the caliber of Kevin Durant weren't leaving their teams to join prohibitive favorites like the Golden State Warriors. That wasn't happening, and even more so today. People are fixated on NBA contracts because of the Supermax. Oh my God. Steph Curry is now making $60 million a year. That all has happened during Woj's time covering the NBA. As you can tell listening to this podcast, I wasn't the biggest Woj fan. I did watch him a lot on television because I was waiting for him to break the big news. But I'm like most people, I'm going to miss his online presence way more than his television appearances on SportsCenter. I thought he was a bland personality on TV. What got me most excited was seeing a Woj tweet in the middle of the night saying that my team made a big move or that there was a big trade that just went down. That's what was exciting. I'm going to miss that way more than his appearances on SportsCenter, the NBA Today, or the halftime shows. I'm also just super relieved that we no longer have to talk about this fake, insane rivalry between Woj and Shams, that it's finally over, that Shams can just go and do his thing, and that we don't need to talk about his connection or lack of relationship with Woj, because that was a rivalry I didn't care about whatsoever. Thanks for listening to this edition of Head to Head. I'm Cam McKinney, and there'll be a new episode of the podcast every Monday on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, so please rate, review, and subscribe.